Okay, hopefully this query was not too frustrating. I gotta tell you, we just amped up the difficulty by like a factor of 20 compared to the last 4 queries that we were working on. So this one really amped up the difficulty in a very big way. It really requires you to have a pretty good understanding of every last aspect of making a query, and especially promises as well. So let's write out the query. We're gonna start off with the get age range one first, and then we will go over to get years active range. Again, both these queries are going to be nearly identical, so we're going to write out one and then probably just copy paste it all over to the other file and make a quick change or two. So let's check out a diagram just to make sure that we're still on the same page here. Our goal is going to take our list of artists. We're going to take all of the artists in that collection. We'll sort them into a very specific order, and we're going to take just the first entry out of there. So let's start off by finding our minimum age first. So we'll do that with a single query, and then we'll come back and rewrite a second query that's going to find the maximum age. And we're going to combine the two of them together with a promise.all call. Okay? So first we'll start off with our min query. So this is going to be the query that's going to find our minimum age. So we'll say artist. We're going to find every last artist we have. Okay, I want to consider every artist in our artist collection. We'll then sort by the age, and I want to sort from the lowest value to the highest value. So an ascending sort can be done by passing in 1 to the sort function. 1 here means sort in an ascending fashion, go from minimum to maximum. Now here's the key part. I only want to get back the very first artist, because that first artist is going to be the one with the minimum age. Okay, I only want to get back the first one here. So I'm going to say limit 1. Only give me the first one. One very important thing to note, and I didn't really discuss this while we were going through while we were talking about the limit function in the first place, or this limit modifier right here. Here's an alternative solution, something you could have done, and I'm going to tell you right now, do not do this. Okay, you definitely do not want to take this approach. I could have said something like .then, take all of my artists, and then return the first artist, like so. This right here is a very poor approach. The reason that this is a poor approach is that it's going to return we're going to find every last artist that we have. The important thing to keep in mind about all these queries is that the first half of this thing, like all of this right here, is all a query that's going to take place in the MongoDB world. Okay, this is all operation. This is an entire operation that MongoDB is going to entirely sort out for us. Excuse me. As soon as we add on that .then, it means okay, execute this query up here, and then load all of the results back to my Node.js environment. Back to my server. So if I took this approach right here, this artist array right here could be an array of like tens or hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of records that I'm trying to load up to my Node server, which I absolutely do not want to do. We always want to minimize the number of records that get returned from our MongoDB database. And so using a limit of 1 makes sure that happens. It makes sure that Mongo is only going to try to communicate back a single record as opposed to a giant number of records or a giant list of records. So that's why we would always prefer to use limit 1 as opposed to just taking all the artists and then just taking out the first one. Okay, so I think that this is a good place right here. We're finding all the records, we're sorting them by age, and then we're just returning the first article or the first artist. Now the last step that I'm going to do on this query is definitely where, this is where things get a little bit tough. Okay, I'm going to put on one more clause here. Because I only care about the age of this artist as it comes back from this query right here. I only care about the age, right? We don't care about the artist's name or their revenue or their albums or anything like that. I'm going to add on a .then statement. I'm going to take the list of artists that get returned. I'm going to say take the first artist out of there and give me their age. Okay. So this line right here might be a big surprise. You might look at this and say, Stephen, where in the world is this coming from? So the first thing to keep in mind is the terminology that I used. I said I'm going to take my list of artists. So because I used limit.1, that does not mean that the query is going to resolve with a single object, like just a model by itself. Because I used the find helper right here, that means give me back a list of artists or an array of artists. So even though I limited that list to 1, it doesn't mean that we're only going to get this thing called with just a model by itself. It's still going to be an array of models, but there just is only going to be 1 in there. Okay, so that's challenge number 1, recognizing that this is still going to be an array because we used find, but there's only going to be a single artist inside of that array. So then the next challenging thing is to ask yourself, well, Stephen, why are we doing this line here at all? Why are we adding on this dot then? The reason that we're doing this is just a little bit of kind of massaging our API response. That's probably what I would say. By adding on this line right here, it means that if we add on any subsequent dot then on the future, anywhere else, by taking this min query and adding on a dot then, it will be called with just the age, just the minimum age to be precise. So if we add on a dot then to this query, lower down inside this function, it will be called with just the min age, which is the only property that we actually care about off this artist. So this line right here in total, this dot then, is just to make sure, or just to kind of give ourselves a nice kind of termination to this query. Okay, so that's to find our minimum age. So now we're going to take the exact same process again. We're going to take all of our artists, we're going to sort, but this time by descending age, limit 1, and then just pull off the age itself. So let's do it. We're going to make a separate query because we cannot sort by both, one way and then the other way inside of a single query. We'll say artist, we'll find every artist we have. We'll sort by age again, but this time we want to be sorting by descending age. So to sort in a descending fashion, we pass in -1 instead. Now we will limit just the first artist. And finally, we're going to add on that same dot then. So take the list of artists, of which there's only going to be 1 because we limit it to 1, and then just pull off their age. So now we have 2 queries, a minimum and maximum query, that will both resolve with just an age value. Okay, it's not going to resolve with the entire artist, it's just going to be the age by itself. So getting this far was definitely challenging. Okay, so if you got this far, nice job. I gotta tell you, this has been the difficulty of these queries definitely took a huge jump between the last section and this one. So the next thing we need to do is recognize that we do not want to really have to do anything until both of these queries resolve. So we want them to both run simultaneously, and then when they both resolve, we want to make use of the ages that they are resolved with. So because we have 2 separate operations that are going to reach out to our Mongo database, we will combine them together with a promise.all. With promise.all, we pass in an array of promises. So we'll pass in min query and max query. So min query and max query, like so. Also note that I am returning the result of promise.all because that, again, is the expected return value of this whole function. It has to be a promise that resolves with blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the promise.all will be resolved when both the min and max are complete. The last thing to keep in mind here is the little bit of landmine right here at the end. The promise is expected to resolve not with a model this time around, like we did with the previous ones, but with an object containing the min and max ages, like this right here. Okay, so this is the form of the object that we want this promise to be resolved with. So we will add on a dot then. This dot then is going to be called with the result. I'm just going to term it. I'm just going to arbitrarily call it result here. We could have just as easily called it ages or something like that. I'm just going to call it result. Because the first element in this array was the minimum query, and the second element in the array was the max query, the first element and result will be the minimum age, and then the second element will be the maximum age. Okay, so we'll return a min of result at 0 and a max of result at 1. All right, so that last little bit, another little tough part to keep in mind. Remember, on both the minimum and query, inside of the dot then that we ended this thing with, we plucked off just the age. We said, look at that first artist, give me just the age back. That means that at any subsequent dot then that we chain on to max query, like this one right here, exactly this right here, we will receive just the age back from that query. So because we are combining together min query and max query, we receive in an array just the minimum age and the max age. So inside of result, we can take just the minimum and just the maximum and return it inside this overall object. So now, at the very end of the day, like as this all comes, as this is all complete, if we imagine that this entire function right here, this entire thing is called something like dot or get age range, and we call it, and then we chain on a dot then, this dot then would be applied onto this promise.all right here. And so if we put on, like argument or something like that, and we said console.log argument, we would end up with an object that looks like min of, 14 and max of 35. Okay, so that's what this thing would look like in usage. It's a very, we hit a lot of very complex logic inside of here, but the upside to that is that we end up with a very, kind of elegant looking query right here. It's very simple, very straightforward to use for anyone else who's kind of like looking at this thing. A lot of complicated code tucked inside of here, a lot of assumptions, but for anyone else using the query, they get to just say, hey, get the age range, and then here's an object containing the minimum and maximum. All right, again, this was a really tough one. If you didn't get this one, do not sweat it, don't sweat it, don't sweat it. This is why we're going through exercises, so you can get practice, right? And so you can make mistakes, and it's when you make mistakes that you really start to learn stuff. Now the very last thing we need to do is duplicate this query over to the getYearsActiveRange file. So I'm going to take the contents of this function, everything from the first const inside of here, all the way down to the end of the promise.all. I'm going to copy all of it. I'm going to flip over to getYearsActiveRange. I'm going to paste it in here. And then I'm going to make sure that I update age all the way throughout this file or this query to years active. So instead of looking at age, we're looking at years active. Years active, years active, and I think that's about it. So we made sure that we are now sorting by years active, and when we find the artist with the minimum years active, we pull off that years active property. So now I'll save this file as well. I'm gonna make sure that I save both these files. Okay, so definitely both files are saved right now. Okay, time to test this thing out. I'm gonna open up our application. I will refresh it. The application should automatically call both those queries for me, so I shouldn't have to actually do anything. And as you can see on the left-hand side, I now have a age range slider that has much more realistic results than before. So it appears that the minimum age of any artist I have is 20, and the maximum is 43. It's entirely possible, because this is all randomly generated data, that you're going to have a different range and different years active than I. I think that the randomly generated artists that I added in here will take anywhere from a minimum age of like 14 all the way up to like 44. So you might see numbers within that range, and then years active I think spans from like 0 to 15. So now in theory, once we wire together all this search stuff, if I want to see just artists under the age of 30, I could drag down my slider like so, and then we could, in theory, hit submit and see only artists with a range between 20 and 30. Okay, that's it. That's it for the really tough queries here. Let's continue in the next section and start working on our next query.